Hey again, guys. This is Isa with Journey to Programming. We're continuing on here with episode 2 of our series about C# tutorials. And what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about basic operators and maybe basically input and output, all right? So let's go ahead and jump in. Last time we talked about data types and variables, and one of the main data types we talked about was integers. Floats, doubles, strings, and chars, right? So what we'll do today is we're going to continue on with that, but this time we're going to talk about the different operators that are possible in almost all programming languages. So here you could see, let me move you guys over to Visual Studio. So first things first, I'm going to go ahead and show you some comment, different types. So what we have here, the double slashes is a single line comment. The slash asterisk, which this opens a long form comment, and the asterisk slash, which closes the asterisk, are the two different types of commenting that are possible. This is most C languages, Java, and some other web languages as well utilize the same commenting scheme. I think Python uses maybe hashes. I forgot exactly what Python was using, but that's an example there. And then what we have are, I'm going to use comments just to define them. We have operators like your plus sign, minus sign, multiplication, division, modulus, and we've got a not symbol. So these are a variety of different types of operators that you have accessible to you. And going back to that modulus symbol, the modulus symbol should actually be the percentage sign. I actually put an ampersand there. So these are a variety of different operator kind of symbols that we have available to us. Each one of them has overloads for different type of data types or different types of data types. And we'll go ahead and kind of show you some of those. So we all know the plus, minus, multiplication, and division operators here. So let's really quickly do some basic math, and we'll use ints and doubles depending on what we're doing. So let's go ahead and do a sum. So let's define a variable called sum, which is equal to two numbers added together. Let's say 1 plus 2. All right. And then let's do a subtraction here. So let's go and say int difference is equal to, let's say, 11 minus 4. And we can do multiplication. Int product is equal to 3 times 2. And int, we'll do a division. What is divider? Quotient is equal to 6 divided by 2. So now what we have here are 4 different operators being used, and we can all do the basic math. So your sum is going to be equal to 3. Your difference is going to be equal to 7. Your product is going to be equal to 6, and your quotient is going to be equal to 3. All right. Now, the reason I did not continue here is with the modulus operator is because sometimes the modulus operator is new to people that have not worked in computer science. So what the modulus operator does is it gets you the remainder of your quotient or your division problem, okay? So what we could do is say int mod is equal to 7 mod 2, and what the result of this will be is 1. The reason for that is because what's going to happen is it's going to do 7 divided by 2, which is, in this case, because it's an int, is going to be 3 with a remainder of 1 is equal to 3 r equals 1. And so let's just write that out. by using the modulus operator, the output here is going to be the remainder, all right? This is kind of an operator that you're going to use in very specific cases. And as you guys progress in your algorithms and data structures studies, you will maybe get exposed to cases where you'll use a modulus operator more frequently, but it just depends. It's also an easy way if you ever get asked how to determine if a value is even or odd, you can use the modulus operator to divide it by 2. So anything modded by 2, if it has a remainder, is odd, right? Especially if you have an integer. Easy way to check. All right. Let's see. So now the other thing I've placed in here is the not symbol. So this is really used when you use conditionals. It is a way of basically inverting the output shown. So I'll show you guys this in a few minutes. It's really widely used when you use bools, which now that I think about it, I did not show you guys Boolean data types in the first episode of this series. So bool, it stands for Boolean, and let's say is even. Okay, and its variable data type is either true or false. It can only be one or the other. All right, so it's very much used in conditional statements throughout software development, and you will definitely use bools as a way to denote the status of an object or of a function and stuff like that. Very commonly, they are used as return statements from helper functions. So you'll get used to bools. Hopefully you've already seen them before and this isn't surprising to you, and my bad for forgetting it in the first tutorial of the series. But if you were to want to negate this or invert it, what I could say is even, which is currently equal to false, is now equal to exclamation mark is even. So what this does, it says is even, which is currently set to false on the line before this new line, is equal to false. Now I'm setting it equal to the inversion, or the not is false, the not is even, which if you were to write this out, you're basically saying is even is equal to negation of false. And when you have a negative times a negative, we get a positive, right? So if you were to have a bool that said is odd or is true is equal to true, so we define a Boolean as true and then we negate it, then it will become false. All right, so now if we wanted to print these out so you can see exactly what's going on, then here's an easy way to do it. So you remember in our first tutorial of the series, we did a console.writeLine. And one way that we printed out numbers with separations is we printed them out with a delimiter between them. So in the first one, I used commas. I'm going to do that again. So I'm going to say sum plus a comma plus diff plus another comma plus prod plus quotient plus modulus. All right, so we should have a printout here of one line that's going to say 3, 7, 6, 3, and 1. And then what I want to do is I want to do a console.writeLine of the variable is even after we've negated it, but I also want to print it out before we've negated it. And I want to do the same thing with our is true. So you guys can see that by negating it, we're just flipping its value or its sign. So if I go and build this solution, and before you run it, try to run through this in your mind and make sure that you understand it, and then verify that by running it. with the start without debugging or Control F5. If we look at this, we should see 3, which is the sum, the difference of 7, the product of 6, the quotient of 3, which is the division, the modulus of 1, which is the remainder of 7 divided by 2 if it were an integer, if it were an integer resultant, and then we should have is even, which is originally false, its negation, which turns it to true, and then we should have, oops, I've defined is true, but I haven't used it down here in our printouts. And then I've put a printout higher above the is true variable, which will cause an issue. So actually, let me show you what will happen here if I were to try this. So I defined is true on line 33. I tried to print it out on line 32, and the compiler, which is probably running continuously nowadays, which it is to an extent, and the IntelliSense have decided to say, hey, this has not been declared yet because it's declared on the next line. Order of operations, guys, you have to declare something before you can utilize it in code. So we're going to throw out a red squiggly. If we try to compile this, we should see the error that is currently being squigglied here, all right? So cannot use local variable is true before it is declared because it's declared after this command. So if we just move this line down, which we see here, there's no error, it will work. So I'm going to go ahead and move this down underneath the negation because that's where we really want it to be. And what we should see is this will be true at first and then it will become false. So let's go ahead and take a look. I build it. I'm going to Control F5 again to run without debugging. And you should see, okay, so for the it is even, which is our first 2 false and trues here, they look right. It began as false, defined here. We negated it, it becomes true. And then our is true gets printed out, which is here. It starts as true. We negate it, it becomes false. So those are operators. Now, let's go ahead and talk about one other thing which may be helpful for you guys. So I think something else that would be helpful is learning how to read in input from the console. Say you want to add 2 numbers that the user gives you, and you want them to enter that into the console. So one way to do that is you can actually do a console.read. And what that'll allow you to do is it will allow you to read in input that a user enters into the console and then use it in your code to do something. Before we do that, what we need to do is we need to define some prompts for the user to understand what's going on. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and scroll down here, but I'm going to comment out our prior console.write lines and writes just so it cleans up our console a little bit. And I'm going to create our prompt here using just console.write lines. So if I do this, I'm going to do a console.write line. I'll do a write line. Actually, let's do a write. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the user to enter a number, okay? Enter a, let's do an integer. All right. And I want to read that integer by, first of all, saying int user input 1 is equal to console.read. So if you look at the help tips or the documentation that shows up for the read function, then you'll see that it reads the next character from the standard input stream. It returns it as an integer, which is what we need because we've defined our user input 1 as an integer. And ultimately what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make a sum function, okay? So let's confirm that this is working before we go anywhere else. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to print out the number that the user enters. And I'm going to print that out on its own line by just saying user console.write line and then passing in the user input 1 variable. All right, we see no errors, no squigglies. Let's go ahead and build it. The build has succeeded. I'm going to do a Control F5 to run this without debugging. And you can see my prompt is here. I hope you guys can read that. Let me zoom it in. I'm going to enter 100. And then I'm going to press enter. And you can see that we have received output there. I must have done something wrong. So let's take a look. So this is reading the next character from the input string and printing it out. Oh, it's probably reading each character individually. Okay, so theoretically, let me see if this will do what I want it. Let's go back to running Control F5. And what I want to pass in is I want to pass in 49. Let me just pull up a quick sheet here. ASCII. So what I'm doing here is I think this is reading in characters, which will basically be the ASCII representation of them and converting that to an int. So if we look at the decimal number we want, 0 or 1, and then we go ahead and have our input be, let's run this again. $49. Oh, you'll see that 49 is represented by 1. And that's because you're getting the ASCII representation because your keyboard is the one passing in the number. Okay, so now if we wanted to, for example, represent 0, it's going to say 48. So we're getting the ASCII representation of what we actually want. So 48. Oh, sorry. So let's pass in 0 and we should see 48. Let's rerun this. 0, we get 48. Say we want 7. It should be 55. So if we do a 7, it's going to be 55. There we go. So we need to do something here to make sure that when we're reading in the data, it's properly converting that to an integer. So let's go ahead and take a look at the other input commands that we have. So let's see. If we do console.read, and we do a read key. Let's see, obtains the next character or function key pressed by the user, or we have a read line. So if we read this line, it's going to return a string. All right, so what we can do is we can work with that for now. I'm going to go ahead and allow that to occur. And instead, I'm going to let the user input be a string. And I'm going to show you guys how to convert the string using some of the C# library functions into an integer. Now, we're not validating that a user's inputting things correctly here, but let's imagine that our user is always going to input correctly, and let's go ahead and test this. So our user input is going to get received from the console, and we're going to print it out, and it's going to print out as a string. So let's go ahead and run this, start without debugging, and we're going to print out, or we're going to enter an integer 100. Great, so we've printed out 100. That's because it's entering as a string. We are receiving the string here, and then we're printing it out here. What I want to do now is I want to convert that to something we can use. But before we do that, what I'm going to tell you guys is we're going to use a library called int.parse. So one second. We're going to use a library function. Yeah, I guess we just use lowercase int, and then we're going to use parse to convert that into the data we want. And what we'll do is we'll use a try parse just to be a little safer. And what we need to do is we need to change this to, we need to create the variables that are going to be used to store the data to pass into try parse. So we're going to make a user input 1 variable, and we're going to make this a I user input to stand for integer user input. And what we're going to do is we're going to pass this into try parse. So try parse takes in 2 parameters, the string that we want to convert, which is user input 1, and the out result variable. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to pass the out, or the output parameter, to I user input 1. All right. So if this successfully converts from a string to an integer, then it will pass the data into I user input 1. We're using try parse, which is going to return as a function whether or not this successfully occurred. So that is helpful in future cases when you guys want to make sure that the users entered a integer that is properly converted to an int from string. But in this case, again, we're skipping out the validation. If we wanted to, we could just go ahead and remove try and assume that the user is going to properly enter the data. And if we do it this way, we can just say int I user input is equal to the output from int parse. Now we could print this again, and we'll see that now we're printing out the integer version, and that should print out properly and show us 100 if I enter 100 here, or whatever the user inputs. Let's enter, in this case, 1001. Oops. Control F5 will help there. So 1001. All right. So that's great. Let's go ahead and now take in another user input. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and copy this, just so we don't have to write it from scratch again. Enter another integer. And this time it's going to be user input 2. We're going to make that I user input 2 is equal to that converted using the parse method. And then we're going to print that out and confirm that now we have both inputs. So let's go ahead and try that. Control F5 to run without debugging. I'm going to make my first number 49 and my second one 101. So we have 49 and 101. That's right, we're reading in data correctly. Now, what I want you guys to do is to use our operators to add these numbers together. So take a minute now, pause this video, and try doing that on your own. All right, so what we have is 2 integers that we can now add together to create a sum. And the way we can do that is, first of all, we can make a integer user input sum is equal to I user input 1 plus I user input 2. So what this is doing is it's creating a variable called user input sum, which is equal to the sum of I user, which is integer user input 1, and I user 2. And then what we'll do is we'll print that out to confirm that we get the right data. So we're going to go in a right line, and we're going to use a user input sum. And now we have something that is actually going to be able to calculate dynamically the sum of user input. So if we go ahead and build this, I'm using the hotkey to build the solution, which is Control-Shift-B, or you can go up to the build menu and go to build solution. See, it's Control-Shift-B here. We have no errors, and then I'm going to go ahead and run it with Control F5, which go to debug, start without debugging, and let's confirm that this works right. So we enter an integer like our prompt asks, let's say 25, and let's make our second one 13. So before I hit enter here, we would assume that our sum is going to be 38. Let's confirm that. Great. So we have 38, that's our sum. Now let's test this again and just confirm that it works for other values. You guys can confirm that I'm not cheating and hard coding any data in, which obviously is not in there. But let's go ahead and do it again. This time, let's go ahead and add up, let's say 139. This would be 139. Excellent. So we have code that's properly adding in user input. And I'm going to go ahead and end us there. What I want you guys to do is I want you guys to use this information to create a form. Okay, use a form to allow a user to either add or subtract. Actually, you don't have to add in the conditionals if we haven't gone over that yet, but play around with the different operators. Take user input and use the different operators to create some sort of calculation, and go ahead and print that out in a more clean manner so it doesn't look so much like this. So we have a number there, we have that. So it doesn't look messy where I'm entering the integer, then I'm printing it out, and then another one, printing that out again. So you have duplicates, and then you randomly have a number with no information regarding what that number is. Clean this up, clean up your output, and make it look good. Maybe state that, enter the first value you want to add, enter the second value you wanted to add, and then when you provide the sum, maybe say the sum of those two numbers is the output. So go ahead and do that. Once you've got your result, post it in the comments down below so we know you did it. And if you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the comments and we will help you as soon as possible. Make sure you subscribe. Have a good one, you guys.